Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our brand new study. We're going to take a look at a brand new book, a book by A.M. Olson on Hegel and the Spirit, published by Princeton University Press. And we're going to cover the introduction in this lesson, but remember, in every time one of the lessons we cover, it will include Olson's take on Hegel, and I will include my own interpretation of Hegel as well. So this will be my reading of his manuscript. Let's take a look at the introduction now. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at the logic of the concept of Geist. Geist is Hegel's grand philosophical category, his most basic category of spirit. It encompasses both logic and time. Spirit is the least differentiated of all Hegel's categories. Spirit functions as Hegel's, here's the key for Olson. Spirit is to be interpreted in a representative way of representing Hegel's mediating hermeneutic. Spirit is Hegel's mediating hermeneutic. Spirit is the dynamic life of the concept, or the dynamic life of the eidos ideas that make up our sign model of the real. Spirit is an all-encompassing panentheism, not pantheism, but notice panentheism. We must give attention to the theological dimension of spirit. And I agree with Olson on that. There is a theological dimension to the philosophy of Hegel. The theological dimension of spirit. The hypothesis is the logic as a speculative pneumatology. Spirit as an eidos notion generates thoughtful perception, generates spiritual perception, generates noesis. Again, go back to my summary lesson, and noesis is the first stage of heading towards spiritual self-consciousness. So we got the logic in block 1. Now we're going to look at the essence as the incarnate spirit within the temporal finitude in block 2. Pneumatology as Hegel's superior point of reference. It is an ontological meta-narrative, and it represents divine and human dignity, divine and human identity in dialogue within the realm of positing, which is the presence of the living sense of spirit. The living sense of spirit as an ontological meta-narrative, a structure of reality. Exemplified, and I love that Olson went here, because I agree that Rudolf Otto is very much in alignment with our understanding of Hegel. Rudolf Otto's book, The Idea of the Holy, deals with the noumenal versus phenomenal realities, the noumenon, the noumenal realities. So I think it's very much in tune with Husserl and with Hegel. Spirit possesses the power of the logic, the eternal logos, that interpenetrates the experiment within temporal finitude. And it is what? The experiment of dialectic, or Aufheben in German. Aufheben is becoming through negation coupled with preservation of the universal. We negate the determinate aspect of sensate existence while at the same time we preserve and affirm the universal aspect. We negate the determinate, we affirm and preserve the universal. That's called Aufheben or Aufheben. Spirit and the power of its logic, through which we acquire existential freedom and bliss. We participate in explicating God consciousness along with human self-consciousness, and that is attaining unto absolute knowing and absolute spirit. Very, very powerful. Block 1 gave us the logic of Geist. Block 2 gave us the essence as the incarnate spirit within the realm of positing. Now we move on to the actual realm of spirit in Block 3. Okay, Block 3, Spirit and the Return of Recognition. And it's a qualification of our hermeneutic, which provides a religious mediation. All genuine philosophy is theology, resulting in an ongoing development of the category of spirit, enlarging it into a transformed pneumatology. Olson says, what we develop in the realm of positing, with our positing of our sign model and the return of recognition, in that dialectic of positing and return, we are working out a pneumatology as a hermeneutic, a doctrine of spirit, which is also a doctrine of hermeneutic, a way to interpret reality. The internalized work of developing the notion of spirit. The rational nature of the soul is emphasized. Spirit provides the bond and the unity between subjectivity and objectivity through deep phenomenological complexity. This is true mediation of spirit. We've talked about that before, but in the realm of positing, what do? We posit our sign model, but where do we place it? We place it at the edge of the forefront of our mind, at the edge of objectivity. So we construct our sign model subjectively within the inner self, but we posit it as a filter at the edge of objectivity. It is always the positing of an internal externality. That's my input here along with Olson. We always posit our sign model as a filter, as an internal externality. We construct it subjectively, but we posit it as an objective filter that does what? Guides us in interpreting reality. What does that mean? That's hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the doctrine of interpretation. So what does that filter do? It's the filter through which we interpret the world. It becomes the filter through which we interpret reality. So I agree with Olson that what we're moving toward with Hegel, with the work of dialectic, is that hermeneutic. So let's go to 3.3, returning freedom of hermeneutical exploration of spirit. We attain into theological self-consciousness. Dialectic becomes transformed into pneumatology, the doctrine of the spirit, with a new understanding of transcendence. This is the return of the simple notion of the whole that imprints our conscience as pronasis mindset. And what are we imprinting our mindset with? A worldview, a ontological view of the whole as a simple notion of the whole, which is what? The internalized filter through which we interpret all of reality. That's hermeneutics. I agree with Olson 100%. Pronasis is a doctrine of hermeneutical phronesis. If you go to the summary lesson on Hegel's phenomenology, remember I had the middle of the page is the inauguration of conscience and the continued reinforcement and maturity of conscience as phronesis, imprinting our spiritual mind set. Well, we imprint our spiritual mind set, says Olson, with that simple notion of the whole, and it is, according to Olson, a doctrine of spirit that is used to interpret reality. I agree 100%. When we posit our sign model made up of the eidos ideas of the kingdom, we construct that sign model subjectively in the inner self, but we posit that sign model at the edge of objectivity at the forefront of our mind as a filter, an objective filter. And that filter is that through which we interpret the world, through which we interpret reality. Well, what's hermeneutics? The doctrine of interpretation. So I agree with this introduction by Olson. Hegel does teach a spiritual doctrine of hermeneutical phronesis, hermeneutical spiritual imprinting of the spiritual mind set, which we call conscience. That's the word we give to conscience. In Greek, it's phronesis, spiritual mind set. And Olson says what that is, that's a central locale of our hermeneutic. Our hermeneutic rests in our imprinted mind set. Our conscience is a conscience that functions as a hermeneutic, as an interpretive guide to understanding historical reality. So, the introduction was designed by Olson to give us the intent of the manuscript. And what Olson wants us to learn in his introduction is that the intent of his manuscript is to teach Hegel as a theologian, more than a philosopher, as a theologian who emphasizes pneumatology as a hermeneutic, the doctrine of spirit as a doctrine of interpretation. And if you go to the summary lesson I did on the phenomenology of spirit, you'll notice that that step labeled conscience in the Greek is labeled phronesis. Phronesis translates spiritual mind set. Conscience, spiritual mind set. So what we have to understand is that Olson wants us to be centered in our understanding of Hegel on a dialectic of positing and return that serves that ultimate return of imprinting the phronesis spiritual mindset of the self with a hermeneutical guide, a hermeneutical picture, a hermeneutical internalized filter, which we will continue to refine, which we will continue to mature, which we will continue to posit and strive for recognition by another. So for me, I guess first of all, you notice that my reading of Olson I did imprint the framework with logic, essence, and spirit. That is Hegel's triad, so I imprinted his introduction with that triad. We looked at the logic of the concept of Geist. We looked at the essence of the incarnate spirit within temporal finitude as the dialectic. And then we looked at the spirit as the return of recognition that brings about a mature phronesis mindset that is basically a central internalized hermeneutic, a central internalized doctrine of interpretation through which guides us in construction of our sign model that we will posit as a internal externality, that we will posit as a filter through which we will interpret all of reality. So my own impression here in this very brief introduction, but very informative introduction, just pages 3 to 14, but it gave us the very clearly defined intent of the author. We will be examining Hegel as a theologian more than a philosopher, and a theologian teaching a transformed pneumatology, teaching a transformed doctrine of the Spirit, a transformed doctrine of the Spirit that is coupled with the doctrine of hermeneutics, the doctrine of interpretation. That's going to wrap up our first lesson, the introduction to A.M. Olson's Hegel and the Spirit. We will pick up with the next lesson that I guess we'll pick up on page 15, and we will proceed with this very powerful interpretation of Hegel and his pneumatology.